People who legally died for a few minutes and came back, what was it like? A friend of mine had overdose, caused a stroke and legally died for a little under 3 minutes in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. He remembers the stroke, and being wheeled to the ambulance on a stretcher. Then he felt like he was floating under ice-cold water, and it was dark, but he wasn't really thinking or feeling anything emotionally, just existing and knowing it was very very cold and he couldn't see. Then he woke up, and the EMTs were kinda freaked out because his heart had stopped long enough that they figured he was done. At some point in the following days he became convinced that what he experienced was hell minus the knowledge of suffering, like a toned-down preview, and thought it was a warning for him to change his life. Sadly he didn't stay clean for long, working in a hospital and taking care of people who have been legally dead and have come back either on their own accord or with CPR. I've heard these people say that they felt like they were falling. They also wake up really confused, not remembering the situation. To me it seems like what they experience is close to a dream, that you're falling and wake up with a jolt. Total darkness. Like going to sleep with no dreams. Until you are brought back, then searing pain kicks in. I guess it's PC, the body goes out of shock, and you feel everything. That's what it felt like to me. My dad ended up in the ICU with internal bleeding. All initial attempts to stop the bleeding failed. Apparently died for a couple of minutes, but they were able to bring him back. He said he remembers walking through an all-grey neighborhood. Grey houses, grey grass, grey streets, everything a different shade of grey. No people or animals around. Empty but not run down or anything like that. He assumed this was the afterlife, so he proceeded to walk around and search for my cousin who recently passed away. He made his way into a house and walked up the stairs. At the top of the stairs a door opened and a bright light shined through. He couldn't see anything because of the light but decided not to walk into it. He passed there on the stairs and asked for more time. The door closed. Doctor was able to stop the bleeding. That was 12 years ago. My dad still has health issues, but he got more time like asked for. I've been pronounced dead twice in my life. The first time, I drowned as a child, about 7 years old. I wanted to see the pool from the high dive. I went up, looked, and slipped when I went to go back down. I remember falling. And then I was surrounded by paramedics and spewing pool water from my lungs while some lady was crossing herself. According to what I've been able to piece together, I was knocked out when I hit the water, and the lifeguard thought I was playing. I drowned while everyone was waiting for me to surface. 911 was called and I was dragged from the water. CPR, before, and from the paramedics didn't work. They were about to cover me up when I started spewing water like a fountain. The second time was at work in my early 20s. I'm an industrial electrician, still to this day. I was working on the controls for a 3-phase /600V air handler's motor. I had turned the circuit off, locked it, and tagged it. Someone cut my lock off and turned it back on without telling anyone. 1 second I'm working on the controls, next second my entire body lights up with pure pain and agony, and then I wake up in the hospital. My boss heard my teeth clack shut when I got hit, and he hit me in the chest with a 2x4 to get me off of it. I didn't have a pulse when EMTs got there, and they got my body rebooted. I woke up in the hospital about 4 hours later. I never saw a light at the end of a tunnel, no lake of fire. Literally nothing. I'll post an update if it happens again. When I was a teenager I had leukemia, and there was a set of shots that we would do at home that my mom would give me. We did not know that I would have a toxic reaction towards the end of the series. After getting a shot and right before dinner I told my mom I wasn't feeling well and I passed out and stopped breathing. I was dead for at least a couple of minutes before my dad started CPR and the medics came. I do not remember telling my mom that I felt weird. Next thing I remember was feeling very cold and hearing my mom's voice. They were taking me out to the ambulance and it was winter time. My mom was talking to them. I later found out. I was very out of it, but I felt warm hands on my arm and a woman telling me it was going to be okay. I guess at one point I hugged her and told her I loved her. I have kept in touch with her over the years. If I could have the feeling of the warm hands and someone telling me everything was going to be okay when I die for real, I will be happy. There's an interesting book called Life After Life by a Dr. Moody who became interested in this experience when one of his patients went through it. He did a study, interviewing hundreds of people who had this happen to them. He said that there were a variety of experiences, some not remembering anything, but he listed 7 common ones. Not everyone had all 7, but everyone has some of the 7. Buzzing noise, feeling like they were out of the body, going through a tunnel, meeting former family or friends, meeting a being of light, coming to a boundary where they knew that if they crossed it, they couldn't return. I can't remember the last one. Failed suicide attempt. When I was being resuscitated by Dad after he found me hanging, in my dream I woke up in the water. I was looking around and just acknowledged my surroundings. By the time my brain processed where I was, I realized I was drowning. I looked down, it was pitch black, looked up, and swam for my life. It felt like I was running out of oxygen. Just as I hit the top, I woke up and was being put into the ambulance, fell asleep again, then woke up later in ICU. Was 10+ years ago. Lol. I kinda wanna know about the people who died illegally and came back. My mother was legally dead for a half an hour due to a cardiac arrest. As a side note, recovery from cardiac arrest after 10 minutes is a 1% chance and decreases exponentially every second after that, so it's really a miracle she survived, and with very little brain damage to boot. She remembers a dream in that time where she was headed towards a bridge. On the other side she saw her, deceased, parents smiling and waving. As she approached the bridge, their expressions changed. They didn't want her. My mom explains feeling rejected by her own parents and crestfallen because of it, but she didn't get on the bridge and turned around. After she came back, she recognizes the change in their demeanors to be that they didn't want her yet because it wasn't her time to cross over yet. Howdy, I died on May 28, 2020 during an emergency procedure on my esophagus. I basically drowned in my own spit and blood while under. I did have something that could have just been my brain doing weird things. I immediately saw myself from the vantage of the room. Everyone but one stepped away and he calmly began performing CPR. I remember knowing that I had the choice to move on or go back, and behind me was a sixth sense of joy, but that could have been my brain. The doctor, who I have not met, walked in and I remember he had a 6-square watch on his wrist, saw what was going on and left. I guess the head nurse guy is known to be good at what he's doing. Oh, and BTW, they didn't use those pedals where they say clear. So I'm wondering if that's just a movie thing. The other nurses were talking and one said he had gout, which is why he had the foot brace thing on. While I saw the flat line from this vantage, it being positioned behind real me. Some other wonky stuff happened. I do remember seeing how frail I was and sort of knowing everyone in the room being good people. Then I was rushing to me, and me threw up a foamy red vomit, and then bam, I was awake with a massive headache and tubes in my throat. They put me under again after a few moments. Later, whenever I woke up in my hospital room, I asked one of the attending nurses to ask the doctor what kind of watch he wore, the square one. She came back and said it was diesel. Then we both realized, I have never seen the doctor. Edit, I coded /flatlined, I'm not sure if this meets the definition OP is looking for. I had bacterial meningitis, real bad. Ended up getting an emergency craniotomy. My father was told that I passed, but I honestly don't remember as I was out of it, and afterwards in coma for about a week. While out, I remember having to do this strange game with some figure. For a lack of words, I've been calling it the Reaper. This game was like many games put into one, but if I lost, I was killed somehow. Strange thing is, I also knew losing was fine, it's giving up that was true failure. I couldn't tell you how long I played that game in that genjutsu-like world, but eventually my opponent gave up. Afterwards, like an Adobe Premiere transition, I was in a different world. This world was clouds and blue skies everywhere. I think they were people, but swarms of bits were congregating, flying side by side. I say people lightly though, because I feel it was like I wasn't properly equipped to understand what they were, but this was only what was on my eye level. Below me was a massive forest/jungle/greenery. and 8+ waterways that all lead to a black pit directly below me. I don't know what was down there, or where that hole lead, but it gave me a bad feeling. I just knew don't go there. Above me was a glowing blue ephemeral being. At the time I was a 16-year-old Christian, so I had no idea WTF it was, but after some research in this world, it was probably Krishna. It had many arms and was sitting legs crossed high up, above where any of the bits/people were. The second I noticed it, it saw me, picked me up with its thumb and middle finger and said you're not supposed to be here, and flung me. I remember then hearing fans, and zooming into this planet like a GTA loading screen. This was '06, well before it was done in media. While zooming in I literally saw the hospital I was in, as well as heard he's heating up. I then opened my eyes, freezing, finding out they were putting ice over me because I had a fever of 107.7. Might not count, but family story, takes place in Sicily in the early 1900s. Had a great uncle that the doctors had written off for dead. Uncle remembers a person/angel walking up to him, slapping him on the cheek, and saying, "Hey, get up. It's not your time yet." Doctor was apparently stunned to see him all dressed and good to go when he came back. Edit, Angle Angel. TW, abuse/violence. 28 years ago I was beaten to death by an ex. He had me partially undressed and flat on my back on the sidewalk in front of my apartment. He kept punching me in the face and biting me while yelling at me to shut up. I remember trying to scream for help, but I was swallowing too much of my own blood. I don't remember the police or EMTs showing up. When I was put into the ambulance I wasn't breathing and my heart had stopped. I know the ambulance was yellow because I was looking down at it as if I was sitting in a tree. I wasn't afraid, just curious. I knew I had to get back though because of my young son. The pull to get back to him was very strong. I don't remember anything else. I woke up in the emergency room and the nurses were trying to remove my bra, under wires, and they had the defib, electric paddle thingies, at the ready. I remember getting in the ambulance and I remember getting out. Was completely unaware that I had arrested until I was told some days later. My mother was dead for over 20 minutes. She said she saw nothing, felt nothing. She only knew she'd been dead when she was brought round by the medics in the hospital. As she is a very religious lady, it knocked her religious belief for many years. She now thinks she wasn't supposed to see anything as she feels she would have wanted to stay with those she would have seen like her mother etc. TL, doctor, my OB made a medical error during birth, and I hemorrhaged, coded, died and was revived in an emergency surgery. I saw my late dad, who sent me back. I, then 29F, hemorrhaged, coded, died and was revived after giving birth to my first son. I had a mandated C-section, was not allowed to even attempt vaginal birth due to musculoskeletal disease, and when I was in recovery, I started feeling gushes of blood. I told my nurse, but she told me that I didn't know what I was talking about, because it's your first baby. A few minutes go by and I started feeling weak, and strangely calm. I told my husband I loved him and thought I was dying. He ran for a nurse, who came in and peeked under my sheets to find a puddle of blood. She pulled the all-call code, and I was suddenly being rushed back to the operating theater for an emergency laparotomy. I remember being told to say goodbye to my husband and new baby because I may not make it. My nurse crying, the angry beep of machines. Then all the light and sound were being sucked out of the room like a vacuum. Then nothingness. I woke up in a foggy place, but the sun or light source was shining somehow. It was a complete contradiction, but I accepted it. It was the most perfect temperature. And then I saw my late daddy. I was a daddy's girl through and through, and I was by his bedside when he took his last breath at 52. I rushed to him and we sat on a classic park bench. I could feel that we weren't alone, but not in a creepy way. I just couldn't see them, only my daddy. Dressed in his favorite flannel and jeans, restored to health, how he looked in his prime before cancer ravaged him. I told him how I wanted to stay with him because I missed him, and I felt no pain here. There is not a waking moment I am not in pain due to my condition. He told me that he knew my wings weren't ready, and that I had to go back to take care of my boys. That my husband needed me for our boys. We shared all this without speaking a single word. It was just an instant understanding. He promised he would always be with me in my most difficult times. And he has. I leaned over to put my head on his shoulder, and I woke up a day and a half later in the ICU, was there 5 days. I lost 40% of my blood. I don't remember most of my baby's birth, and traumatized my husband so badly he didn't want to try for more kids for years. And they poorly matched my blood for transfusions and I ended up GEL positive. But that's another story for another time. I watched my mom die from acute pulmonary edema. She looked me straight in the eye seconds before and said, "I'm not afraid." She says she's glad to see me. She was revived and had no memory of what she saw, unfortunately. She passed away a year later. Had a guy code on us on the way to the hospital, one shock and like 30 seconds of CPR and he's back. Pretty out of it as to be expected after death. I'm driving us in and I hear from the back, "Guy, what happened? I feel weird." Medic, "Does your chest hurt?" Guy, "No, why?" Medic, "Well, you fucking died on us, we shocked you and did CPR. Not cool." Guy, "Oh, I'm sorry." So apparently it's pretty disorienting. My dad used to be an all-rollite pilot when he was in his early 20s. He had a mechanical error and crashed in the mountains in TN. He was in a coma and ended up dying in the hospital for a few minutes. First he remembered looking at himself and the room from above. He could see everyone there, and later described the room, where people were sitting, and what the staff, who he had never seen, looked like. He remembers talking to God in a foggy tunnel, and saying he wanted to go with him to heaven. God said the decision was his, but choosing to leave meant making his friends and family suffer a great deal. God promised him that if he went back home, that he would see heaven, so he turned around and went back to his body. They revived him in the hospital and he woke up. For the next few months during recovery, they would have him take walks in the hallways. He would stop at the windows and start describing what he saw, but it wasn't the parking lots and streets, it was beautiful landscapes with brilliant lights, unlike anything on Earth. He swears to this day that he was seeing glimpses of heaven from the windows, just as God promised him. He was also able to recognize and name everything he'd seen while he was out of body. I'm not particularly religious myself, but if that shit isn't some level of something, what else is? I had a heart attack while on a run. Dropped dead and bounced off the ground. Cardiologists are sure my heart stopped for about 30 seconds. I snapped back to when the guys started calling my name. It wasn't a Fred Sanford, it's the big one Elizabeth event. Didn't see any light or myself, it was like a surreal dream without anything remarkable. Got up and walked the last 50 feet, 15 meters, to cross the finish line. Did damage to the heart, received multiple stents, in the hospital for 4 days and was 50 years old. Moral of the story, listen to your body. Hey there. I've actually died twice. Crazy premature birth, heart and lungs didn't work great, and it took a mess of wacky science to bring me back. But I was too young then to remember anything obviously, so that doesn't super count. Second time, I was 19 and got clobbered by a drunk driver. I remember seeing the truck coming up behind me, so I moved to the other side of the road, and then wham. About 2 to 3 seconds of pain and chaos and fear. Apparently I managed to find my phone and one of my shoes, then called for help. My jaw was shattered but I was just screaming and they GPS'd me, but I have no memory of that. My next memory, after the brief shock of being struck, was the paramedic cutting a track. You wanna know what that's like? It's like if your sleep paralysis demon finally catches up to you. Then the next memory is waking up a week later, with a half-dozen tubes plugged into me, thrashing and screaming and crying like it had just happened. No biblical dreams, no light at the end of the tunnel. Just chilling to some music on a walk, greater than being flung into a tree, greater than having my throat cut open, greater than waking up a week later in a matter of seconds. 010 wouldn't recommend, except I firmly lost any faith I had in an afterlife and it caused a huge rift in my very religious family. Tell me more about what happens when you die, Mom. I'd love to hear your theories. Edit. Okay guys, I get it, I'm an idiot and completely misread the title. I was clinically dead, not legally dead. I'm sorry. Don't know, I was 10 months old. 3 heart attacks, in the last one they gave up and declared me dead. I came back on my own. Hated the other side, I supposed. My father actually had a heart attack and by some miracle he was lucky to get to the hospital in time before it was too late, but in the ambulance he flatlined and they had to revive him I think twice. Which obviously worked, but it took I think about 4 or 5 minutes, which made everyone worry because his heart wasn't beating, which means he's not getting blood to his brain that will cause brain damage. Long story short, no brain issues and he's completely healthy. I asked about his experience and if he saw some light or anything, but he doesn't remember anything. He almost never remembers his dreams, so even if he did see something I don't think he'd remember through all of that. Lol. Died on New Year's Day this year from a heroin overdose. Was pleasant, tossed on some tunes, went over to the couch to sit down as the shit was coming on, then the next thing I knew I was sitting in the back of an ambulance being told I had just died from an overdose. Really, it was just like sleeping. 1 minute I was there, faded out, then faded back in. Don't recall anything in between, but I imagine it must have been horrible for my mom to find me that way. So yeah, kids, don't fuck with heroin or opiates in general. Thankfully I'm not addicted to the stuff, just occasionally dabbled for many years, but after that shit I'm done for good. I left my body and visited my closest loved ones. I knew I had died and it was an attempt at suicide via nod. It was like a long lucid dream. I had given up physically and mentally, and I essentially was guided around by some unknown force showing me my family, and I was telepathically told that I have free will and I can die if I choose, but I have so much yet to do on Earth and my family needs me as well as others. The message was clear and I decided that I needed to come back and continue on. Then I awoke at the brink of death, huddled up like a dying cat in a bathroom, alone and cold, having not eaten for days. I didn't have any doubt in my mind what happened wasn't real, but what really truly solidifies it was when I was talking to my mom. They all had no idea at the time what had happened, and she kept telling me my sister was freaking out because she said she saw me walking around the house the other night when I was not even at the house, and it scared her. When my mom told her the next morning that I wasn't even in town. My mom knows I'm into astral traveling, so she joked that I had visited the family. Just so happened to be the same day I died and felt my body beat its last beat, and I gave up completely and went for an out-of-body travel with probably my spirit guide, who made it very clear that this was not supposed to happen and my mission wasn't finished here on Earth. I'm much better now and kicked the addiction and life habits and haven't been this happy since I was little. There is a show on Netflix that just came out called Surviving Death, and the first episode is all about this and what people experienced while they were dead. It was really neat. It was like nothing. I remember pulling out onto the road that I got hit on, then waking up in ICU a few days later. Clinically dead for a minute and a half. When I was a kid I contracted dengue fever. Major killer of kids my age. So while I was hemorrhaging blood, the crackhead doctors told my parents I had to have an appendix removal. They put me under but realized something was wrong when I didn't wake up for 48 hours later. During that time I had a hell of a dream. Was walking on a beach and there was a dude cloaked in black sitting on a bench. Had a nice chat with him before walking up. I got injected with some medicine on an adult dose when I was just 10 years old. I started feeling funny and went to my father to tell him about it, just to collapse right beside him and hitting my back head so hard I had a stroke and my arms recoiled. According to everyone, at least, I don't remember that. What I do remember is suddenly being on my house, but somehow it appeared that my house was floating on a blue vacuum, and, for some reason, I had the urge to go upstairs. I walked slowly up to where my room was. My room's door was closed but my parents' wasn't, and inside my parents' room there was what I could only describe as the brightest light I've ever seen. It didn't shine me too, it was a very penetrating blue light, the ones that get ingrained in your eyes. I started walking towards it, but suddenly I felt like something grabbed me by the foot and pulled me downstairs all the way back to the main door, and suddenly, all turned to black. From there I regained consciousness slowly, and I was again at the hospital, with ice on my head and N4 on my arm. I then proceeded to puke, and that was the end of it. I actually didn't really process what I saw until some days after. I realized I might have just fucking died, lol. My story is kinda boring somehow, but here it goes. Last August, I OD'd accidentally after taking pain meds for a broken hand, drinking and then taking some sleeping pills. I passed out in my apartment and stopped breathing. By the time the paramedics got me into the ambulance and set up, I died a bit. Lamo, it's so weird to type this out. Thankfully, they were able to bring me back and I woke up in the resuscitation room. I didn't remember anything besides darkness and feeling like I was comfortable and sleeping deeply. No light, no sensations, just sleep. When I did wake up, I was very confused. I had memory of what happened and I thought I was still in bed for a couple of seconds until I saw a friend of mine, a surgeon at the hospital, standing next to me. That was when I realized that I'd fucked up really bad. Overall, it wasn't that scary. Even when I was slipping away into unconsciousness, I felt no fear or sadness. Just comfort. I guess that's the scariest part. The end. Not me, but had a friend in high school who died and came back. He swears he went to hell. He was from a very religious family, so it might be top of mind. Heard it from an MBA teacher who went through that. He passed from heart attack for 6 minutes. First he went out of his body and took a while to identify the one body laying dead was his. He listened to all conversations going on between the doctors and attempts to defibrillate him back. He could tell the conversations later and the doctors were shocked. He noticed he was not alone. There was a being of light who told him to be in peace and that his family would be taken care of. No need to worry. He didn't like to hear that too much. Then he was dragged into this tunnel upwards. He then came into a place he could not explain much about, but he saw the colors were awesome. Colors he never saw before. Colors we don't see here. In this place, he met someone he didn't want to say much about. This being was big. He then pledged he had to go back to take care of his children and wife. After long whining and negotiating, the being agreed he could go back with 3 conditions: 1. No more corporate stressful job. His children needed him, not his salary. That's when he became a professor and left his VP position at his former company. 2. He would have to tell his experience on the other side to others whenever he got a chance. That's why he took half an hour to tell us his story in his last class to our group. 3. He was not allowed to tell us before it actually happened. He was waiting something to happen. He then told us a crazy time when he was in high danger. Some guy pulled a gun on him and he handled it very well because he knew he couldn't die yet, not before the 3rd point was fulfilled. In fact, the guy pulled the trigger on him, but it failed to shoot. The gun only worked when the guy missed him. Anyways, I believed him and made more questions because I had read a book of 150 cases of near-death experience before, by a doctor who documented it. His points and details all matched with the doctor's book and with many documentaries I was later on. Not very sure why and how, but I know it was true. This makes me think more than one afterlife is out there. Dream-like and scary until I died, and then it was absolute bliss. I didn't want to come back at first. I'm now glad the hospital brought me back, but that feeling of bliss is something I will never forget. I was resuscitated from a suicide hanging. Everything was black and nothing existed. I'm sorry there isn't more to say. I was quite disappointed myself. Sometimes I questioned if there was more going on and the trauma just erased it from my brain. It was world of grey and occasional bright color. I was sitting on table and listening to people around me. Their voices were muffled. Then it hit me. I could not move. With corner of my eye I saw black figure sitting no more than 2 meters from me. I felt fear and could not move. Then I woke up. Eyes full of blood. Sharp pain. Etc. So during a tilt table exam to test for dysautonomia, I was given a nitroglycerin tablet that stopped my heart for over 30 seconds. I flatlined until they were able to get the table back to horizontal. I don't have any specific memories from during the time I was dead, But the very strange part was when I came back, and saw the room I was in, it was shocking to me. It's hard to describe, but when I realized where I was I could not believe I was still there. It's like I lived some life for what felt like weeks elsewhere, and coming back to this room was a very surprising blast from the past. Like imagine waking up today and it being Christmas morning from a few weeks ago. I was that level of surprised to see that old room again after all that time, 30-ish seconds. I died illegally and was sent to prison for 3 months. For once in my life, I wasn't paying taxes. I died during birth for a few minutes. Don't remember it too obviously. I've heard a lot that it feels like you're not losing energy for once. Like you are actually getting comfortable rest to get energy back. Staying alive is exhausting. 2 years ago, for about 2 minutes, I saw my died grandfather and my aunt. The most strange thing is that I also saw one of my closest friend, that was alive. Or at least he was alive until the previous day. The evening of the same day one of my other friends called me and I discovered that the friend I saw in my vision died 3 hours before me in a car accident. Not sure if I died, but when I was living with a friend we got into a car accident, with 8 of us in there. I took the worst of it. I smashed into the window, still have scars from it. I did not have a belt on, was not required for a passenger to have a belt on at the time. I slumped over, I could not feel anything, could not say anything. I could still hear, everyone's calling my name, but that slowly faded away. I woke up being pushed into an ambulance. This was about 15 minutes later as they are sticking that long plastic tube to open for airway, forgot the device's name. The good news was that I was alive, spent a little over a week in the hospital. I was internally bruised, took about 5 months for me to heal. I felt bad for my mother, she was unaware of anything because we didn't live together. She decided to drop by my friend's house and she was pissed that nobody notified her of the accident. This is a whole different story. It was fucked up. I died in surgery for 2 minutes and the cunts brought me back. I have a friend who has died 3 times and been brought back. He says there is just nothing until you wake up in pain and /orb a lot of tubes running into you. To the people claiming that people don't come back from legally dead, yes they do. There've been a few that have been declared dead, came to in the morgue etc. https://www.nytimes.com/2020/08/25/us/Michigan woman alive funeral home.html. This woman has since passed away, possibly due to lack of proper care when she was prematurely declared dead. I was 14, we were coming home from a family day out when we were smoked by a flatbed truck and flipped into oncoming traffic where we were T-boned by a can. I died twice, both times I was under a lovely weeping birch tree just chilling with my brother who at the time was 8 years old. We had a really deep conversation about how I wouldn't be able to stay with mum for very long, there was people who would need me more. The second death almost took though. I woke to hearing my name followed by a time of death, 2:22 a.m. Doctors still can't answer how I pulled through, but I'm glad I did. My brother didn't survive, he was dead at the scene, and I moved out 5 years later at the age of 19, because me and my mum were butting heads constantly and couldn't see eye to eye on anything. Now 16 years later I've rebuilt that relationship after we both did some much needed personal growth apart. Still don't think I could live with her though. I've definitely found some of the people who needed me though, and ones that helped me more than they'll ever know. This asks a good question. If you're serving a life sentence and then you die, are pronounced legally dead, then come back, should you be let go? I grew up with a mostly managed heart arrhythmia that wasn't dangerous unless my heart rate was too high for too long. 3 times it met that standard, and twice they had to stop then restart my heart. I remember the first time, which was very scary. They gave me a drug and my heart stopped beating in my chest for about 30 seconds. I felt massive pressure like an elephant was settling on my chest and thought I was turning bright red. My dad says I actually turned grey. I could breathe for the first bit of it, but I still felt like I was suffocating because breathing came with no release. Then my heart came back on its own, and it was fine. I don't remember anything at all about the second time, when my heart didn't come back on its own. My mom says I didn't have a heart rate for maybe 2 minutes and I looked totally gone until they shocked my rhythm back. Wish I remembered anything, but I think the episode was so traumatic that my brain wiped the tapes on that entire day. This needs to get in hot, really cool question. I was gone once because of a cerebral hemorrhage after a random kick to the head by a drunk guy. I felt a bit high, because of heavy blood loss before the lights went out. When I woke up I was emotionally numb for the first day. Some of my friends visited me and when I woke up all my day ones were crying on the bedside and stuff, but I couldn't realize why they were so concerned about me and I tried to be funny the whole time, while I was still in a life-threatening condition between falling into coma and waking up. I can't remember well but I know that I dreamt a bit like normal sleeping. Can't remember my dream though. I think the most intense thing, for me it was and it still is, about such an experience is not the moment it's happening but rather the late realization that it in fact happened and how somebody will cope with the thoughts about the fact that life could have been ended at some point and all the questions that come along with it. I OD'd twice on heroin about 10 years ago. They were true odds, as in my heart actually stopped. One was for 8 minutes, the other was for 12 minutes. The first time my buddy I was using with gave me CPR until paramedics showed up. The second time my mom found me in my room and have me CPR until paramedics came. Both times it was just like a dreamless sleep. Except I woke up to the most intense pain imaginable due to the Narcan. My mom had open heart surgery not too long ago and was technically dead for the surgery since no blood was being pumped through her heart. She said it was almost like in the movies where she was in an all-white room and actually got to talk with her dad who passed away 20 years ago. My grandfather did. He got T-boned by someone running a red light, not sure how long he was technically dead, but I do know that his heart stopped for a while, and the doctors didn't actually expect to get him back. He told me later that he'd had the full out-of-body experience, seeing his body on the operating table, getting pulled into a black tunnel with bright warm light at the end, seeing lost loved ones waiting, etc. Apparently, when he got to the end of the tunnel, he heard a voice say, "Not yet." Next thing he knew, he was recovering in a hospital bed with a largely metal leg. Other than the permanent limp, he made a full recovery. I was really sick of some virus when I was like 5 to 6, fever and vomits and all. I was sleeping when I dreamed of being hit by a car and going to a place really warm and peaceful. I was sitting in the grass and my dead grandfather was there with me, talking, and then he said that it was not my time and that I had to come back, and I woke up and my mom was screaming and it was chaos. My mom told me that she woke up and saw me standing in her door, so she got up and went to my room, and I wasn't breathing. She started to scream to my dad to call the ambulance, gave me CPR and then I woke up. I guess I died while I was asleep, and I was in the hospital for a while because I was very sick. My brother's heart stopped for several minutes and he had a very vivid experience. It happened in a university classroom. He lost consciousness, and then he woke up in a building with impossibly tall windows, like 100 or more, and it was brilliantly sunny outside. That was his first clue that he wasn't in the same place, since it was cloudy and raining in his hometown. He told me that he could smell bread baking. He strolled down the hall, which he found odd, because just a few minutes prior he was feeling very weak and sick. He looked around, and asked himself, "Am I in heaven?" And then he said a strange apparition appeared. He said it was a swarm of thousands and thousands of points of light. The apparition spoke, and asked my brother, "Can you see me now?" That's when my brother knew it was God. About 10 years prior to that he had an philosophical argument with a friend about the existence of God, and one of my brother's arguments was you can't even see God. So my brother, knowing he was indeed in heaven, had a long discussion with God about all sorts of earthly scientific mysteries. My brother was suddenly endowed with profound knowledge of how everything worked and why. Then God asked him, "So, do you want to stay?" My brother thought about it and asked if he could return to Earth, but keep all the new knowledge. God said, "Nope, you can return, but the knowledge stays here." He thought about it and said he wanted to come back to life. He suddenly found himself in the hospital. He was trying desperately to remember some of the things that he learned while in heaven. And for a little while, he did. But after the medications, the sleep, the painkillers, he forgot it all. But he never forgot the experience. Have you ever fainted? Like been on a roller coaster and fainted because of the G-force? It was like that for me. I felt so crappy, then my BP started dropping. I remember an alarm, a lot of people coming into the room, moving my arms and my head, then bliss. I don't know how much time passed, all I know is I woke up. There were still people in the room but less chaos, and I was still feeling crappy. There's actually a website full of people's near-death experiences if you're interested in checking it out, https://www.ndf.org/archives/ndf_ndes.html. Not me, but my father told me he had died in surgery. No dreams, no afterlife, no nothing. Kinda off topic. But how does that happen? A $132,000 bill. Doctor here, just want to point out something. Might seem like nitpicking, but it's important for people's perception and understanding. Death is a complicated thing. Your heart stopping doesn't make you legally dead. Your heart can go into what we call non-perfuming rhythms, which is fancy talk for your heart isn't pumping blood. Asystole, where the heart stops completely, is one of those rhythms. But there are others. We do CPR on these patients for the most part, and they are not dead until we stop doing CPR and decide that they cannot be saved. Then we pronounce them legally dead. Someone can also be pronounced legally dead if they have no brain function, which has many complicated steps to determine. I have never seen someone be pronounced dead and make a meaningful recovery. I don't think it's really described as happening in the literature either in recent history. To clarify, this is not talking about patients who we tell the family they will likely die. TL, Dr. Heart stopping doesn't make you legally dead. People who are legally dead don't come back clinically dead. Nobody that is legally dead could be resurrected. It is impossible with all the bureaucracy involved. I came home one night to find my father beating my mother, so I grabbed him and threw him. I got like maybe 2 punches in when he tackled me and just started pounding my face. And that was when I blacked out. I seemed to be standing in this black void, and when I turned around I saw this carved wooden door. There were 2 beautiful women standing next to me in golden armor. Through the door I saw a green field, and a large Viking hall. I recognized it as Valhalla, but I was sad. I turned to one of the women and just broke down sobbing, asking for more time. I seemed to cry for just hours. Then I just faded into being awake. They told me later that I had been dead for 3 minutes. I am of Norse descent, and I've always loved my Scandinavian heritage. I've always loved the idea of Valhalla, and of the pagan gods, but I never really believed it. After that experience, I kinda believe in paganism, but it's still so weird to me. I've never heard of anyone else seeing Valhalla and coming back. I know this seems like super weird, but I have a theory on it. I believe that everyone who dies ends up with the afterlife that they have always wanted, or believed in. If you don't believe in anything, then your mind just takes you to what you hope for. I'm not saying this is fact, but it's the easiest way for everyone to explain why their death experiences are different from one another. Mine was super obscure, but it was what I hoped the afterlife might be like. I hoped that this beautiful idea of Valhalla was real, because it sounded infinitely better than nothing. Or, paganism is real for everyone. Lamau. Yeah, there's people on the world XD. My dad got stuck underwater and drowned in a local pool when he was a kid. He technically died. As of this day, he always says that doesn't remember a thing, not even passing out or the moments right before that. So he can't really say if he was scared shitless or however was feeling then. Everything had this strange fuzziness to it, like a faded filter that was also vibrant had been placed over everything. I'm perceiving everything visually without the use of my now irrelevant physical eyes. The darkness around me stretched in all directions but at a limited depth to it, like if I reached out, it would be shallow while my hand darts out. Suddenly, I saw still images, like a slideshow, enter from the right of my peripheral vision into frame, staying still for several seconds in front of my face, then shoot off to the left out of frame while the next one enters. They were images of a favorite video game at the time, which I later took to be symbolic of pursuing happiness and leisure. After these flashing images had run their course, a ball of pure, fuzzy light began to grow in front of me from the center of nothingness, and it expanded outward while these sharp jets of light were emanating from it. Just pure, shining light, in a sphere shape. After viewing this in a void of nothing, which there were now edges that I could perceive like the sloping sides of a tunnel, for several seconds I instantly darted back to life in my bed, mindfucked. It was a suicide attempt. I, fortunately, survived. I have a co-worker who this happened to, and when he actually died he collapsed out of the chair he was sitting in, and he described it as someone sucker punching him in the back of the head, and then black, no dreams, no lights, no flashbacks, nothing. When he came back he was told the sucker punch that he remembers was his head hitting the ground. You should check out the show I Survived, Beyond %26 back. They thought I died. I didn't notice. Last thing I remember was passing out and then waking up, nothing in between. I wasn't aware that I had died until I was told later. I suffered clinical death 3 times as a newborn. For years my parents thought it had left me with brain damage. Maybe complicated by me having dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia and dyspraxia, because you've got to catch 'em all. And turns out I would play mind games all the time and pretend to be a lot less able than I was when I thought I was alone. Unfortunately no recollection of the times I died. Reading these comments gives me a lot of comfort knowing that there's something after death. Whether it be the heaven and hell thing, or just being a spectator forever. Either way, it's all very nice to know. You bigot, why are you discriminating against us who have illegally died? Itchy, very itchy. It's quote by Superman BTW. I remember being very intrigued by DMT when I was younger, and there were all kinds of studies done that basically found that people that used DMT, and people that died and came back or nearly died, had very similar out-of-body experiences. This whole topic is very interesting. It was like zero time had passed at all. I didn't even know it happened. One moment I was somewhere, and the very next instant all I see is sky, and paramedic heads. I had been down for somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 minutes, no pulse when they found me. Heroin overdose. I've been clean 4.5 years. It's scary, especially because it didn't seem like any big deal to me, because it wasn't. I never experienced what anyone around me experienced, so for me it was just like a time blip. It took a while for me to process just how bad that was and how close of a call it was. Edit for clarity, I was never pronounced dead. I had an O2 bag on my face being worked when I came out of it, so I was being treated very much alive despite having no vitals for those moments. I've died twice, both times from respiratory distress. The first I was on a table. If you've ever fainted, that's what it was like for me. Next thing I know I'm floating above the table and I see the nurses/doctor working on me. I hear the machine making the flatline noise. My mom was in the corner yelling and crying. I don't know how long I was floating, but I felt like I was being pulled. Then I woke up. That time I was dead 5 minutes. A couple of years later I was having visitation with my biological father and I started to experience the same thing as above. He wouldn't take me to the hospital, so he just took me over to my aunt's house and dropped me off on the couch. They called my mom at her work and she rushed to get me. I felt myself get off the couch, but the room was eerily still. I turned around and saw myself twitching on the couch. I was walking around the room for a few minutes and I hear my mom's cutlass come roaring down the road. I ran back over to my body and got sucked back in basically. As she came to the door I woke up and was coughing/gasping for air. I just remembered darkness, but it was peaceful. I was just thinking about how life would be for my kids if I chose to leave. I wasn't sad or panicked, it was just rational thought. Then I remember the overwhelming taste of blood in my mouth. I thought very vividly in a stern voice, okay, you have to make the choice now. If you do nothing you will go. If you decide to stay, this is your one chance. And I felt like I stood up. Then I could hear everyone around me, but I couldn't open my eyes. It felt like I was still not completely in my body. Then I opened my eyes and the doctor said I scared everyone. My mum once told me about a girl she knew who had an illness and was dying from it. The girl was in the lounge watching TV and her younger sister was also in the room. Apparently the ill girl's last word were "it's about fucking time" before dying. Her younger sister said she saw the Grim Reaper, literally death himself, take her soul. The younger sister took her hand out to him, thinking she's next, but he said to her not yet and then he left. To this day it still make me shiver thinking about it. I fell down the stairs and hit my head bad enough to knock me out for almost a minute, during which my jaw locked and according to those around me, I stopped breathing. Darkness, an outdoor corridor made of blue bricks and golden sunlight shining on the vines covering the walls. I saw a short deer with eyes that didn't fit a deer. 4 years later I saw that same deer in a national park in Wisconsin. Eyes were not fitting their frame and somehow I was glazed over. A type of illness according to the guy who was showing me around. I am pretty sure I'll see the blue corridor one day as well. I'm here for the replies. It was dark and gradually I can hear voices of people surrounding me. Then I woke up. I was never formally pronounced dead, but 7 years ago my friend and I got into an argument and he snapped, grabbed my throat, threw me into a door, and held me there until my heart stopped. Sometime in the gasping for air I realized what was going to happen, and between that and the pretty bad concussion made fading out easy. I actually really enjoyed the dead part. There was absolutely nothing. Just a black void. Without the sound of blood going through your ears, it was absolute silence, perfect temp, zero stress, just low ace, solitude, and relaxation. Coming back however, sucked. Once the guy realized what he did, he dropped me, performed CPR, managed to get me back, and every part of my body hurt so bad. The amount of people describing being under/in ice cold water is interesting. I wonder what the correlation is to that vision. Maybe the loss of pumping warm blood? I was actually legally dead twice on the table, but a nurse had some passion for me and kept trying different things even though the doctors wanted to call it. I owe that nurse my life. Anyway, I can't remember much, but I was told that when I came out of the coma, I was saying strange things. I was talking to people that weren't there and I kept calling people by a different name, not everyone but some people. My grandfather wrote in his journal different things I told him, and some of these things are interesting. I told him about this beautiful staircase that was unlike any I had ever seen before. It was a massive staircase, but I couldn't see where it began or where it ended, and it curved upwards to a large open space that was so beautiful. I didn't see anyone or hear anything, but I felt both peace and comfort. I was scared the entire time, but not for myself. I was more concerned about the people I would have left behind. I think back to this time and I can't remember any of it. But it was a profound experience that kind of pissed me off because I don't really believe what happened, and I'm also a bit on the atheist side. Part of me hopes there is more after death, but another part of me hopes that it isn't singular to a specific belief system. My mum had severe anaphylaxis a year and a half ago and she was technically dead for almost 2 hours. She doesn't remember anything. Her brain even deleted some hours worth of memory from before the shock and all of her stay in ICU. My guess is that her brain wanted nothing to do with all that weird shit. I died after I lost a lot of blood after a cesarean. It was cold. I was very aware that I was dying up until that point. It was very cold. Like my skin wasn't cold, by my body was throughout. It was also dark. I was in an also lots of bright light, yet I felt I was inside a very dark place or room. I also felt very at peace once I knew my baby was okay. I did not panic nor feel afraid, and I say that as a person who has been afraid of death from childhood. I'm not sure if I was legally dead or not, but early 2020 I got in a really, really bad car wreck. Like miracle to even be alive bad. I was alert and conscious for the entire process of them cutting me out of the car. However, I was very, very tired. I was impaled, and when they finally got me loose I started losing a lot of blood. In the helicopter I went from being alert to just barely hanging on real quick. When we arrived at the hospital I looked at the nurse who was next to my stretcher, and I remember asking, "Am I at the hospital?" He said yes, and I just let go. I had been hanging on for nearly 2 hours at this point, and I knew that I was in capable hands now. So in the spirit of trust and faith I closed my eyes. To this day I have no clue how long I was out, but I remember what I experienced. The entire time I felt like I was falling. At first it was a slow drift, but it steadily sped up. And the entire time I fell I was remembering my whole life. It was like an instant replay right up until the moment that guy drove into me. And then I was falling really fast. And all I could hear was screaming. But I realized I was hearing me screaming. I finally stopped falling, Therese no more screaming, and then I just hear Peachy Ging, what's your date of birth? And I open my eyes. I'm in the TQ and I'm alive. It was such a weird eerie feeling. I will never forget the face of that nurse. Edited for spelling. Replay right up until the moment that guy drove into me. And then I was falling really fast. And all I could hear was screaming. But I realized I was hearing me screaming. I finally stopped falling, Therese no more screaming, and then I just hear Peachy Ging, what's your date of birth? And I open my eyes. I'm in the TQ and I'm alive. It was such a weird eerie feeling. I will never forget the face of that nurse. Edited for spelling. I know an incredible doctor at the Boulder Hospital, which was just very recently remodeled, and I once asked him a question to this extent. He's normally a very easygoing guy, but when I popped this question, he instantly became super serious. He looked me dead in the eye, and told me about how they get lots of cycling accidents and stuff like that at the hospital, and oftentimes the victims are pronounced legally dead before a feat of miracle doctoring and science. He told me that when opportunity to talk to the doctor in months, mostly due to COVID-19. But I hope this helps to answer your question. At this moment I'm watching the near-death documentary on Netflix while this question popped up. Lol. Oh shit. One I can answer. 3 years ago I was in the ICU in an induced coma, I had ARDS, was reached in organ failure, put me on ECMO, all that. I would gain consciousness randomly and I remember things. I coded twice and had to be brought back twice. I remember seeing the nurses on top of my body from a third-person perspective. I could feel them doing CPR, but I was also watching it. That was a unique feeling. Then I would be back in my body, but it feels different, I guess. The feeling of being outside of yourself and seeing something traumatic like that sticks with you. All the tubes, the machines, and those small nurses on my 6 feet 6 inches frame trying to save me. Afterwards I recognized one of the nurses as being one of the 2 who remained on watch for and saving me. She asked how it was possible that I knew her as I just woke up. I told her verbatim what he was saying as I coded and she began compressions. Then I told them about a few other things that I heard. And I had the whole ICU floored because apparently the drugs and doses I was on should have made me being awake not possible. I dunno, man. Weird. So my heart stopped for only a few seconds, so I don't know if this one is worth anything. But it really just felt icy cold, and tingly throughout my whole body. It felt like falling or floating and that my body was turning to ice from the inside out. Saw nothing. No thoughts in my head, just experiencing. As I was coming back it felt more like dizzy spinning, and I only thought what the fuck just happened. Appendix ruptured in me and didn't have it removed until hours after it did. When I came to, doc told me that he had lost me when they opened me up and removed my intestines to find the burst organ. The bile had spread and I went into septic shock. While I was gone, I remember being inside what seemed like a black palace grand hall that seemed to go on. Everything was black inside. I love the color black and it seemed not scary at all at first. There was a fireplace going with black fire and black wood logs. Furniture, drapes, windows, all shiny black. I remember the floor being like black obsidian and hearing myself walking. Then I felt fear and started to get scared. At the time, I was a believing Protestant Christian and called out for Jesus. I had been baptized and brought up to believe if that I needed him, all I had to do was call out to him and he would comfort me. I got nothing. I called out to God and heard nothing. At that point I rounded off Yahweh, Allah, Buddha, etc. and not hearing a reply started to explore. My initial fear was replaced by wonder at where I was at and I felt a slight boredom creep in. I lastly remember heading down the expanding hall, and then I was back in post-op with the nurse removing the tube down my throat and then me proceeding to throw up. Spent a week in the hospital recovering and then had to go back and clean out the wound by stuffing gauze into it after it got infected and started to leak fluid. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I thought I was sleeping. I have an allergy to codeine. And medications that are close to it. I never know what pain medication will affect me. The first time was Tylenol with codeine and I felt like I was barely able to breathe. Felt like if I relaxed, I would die. I made it through it, but the panic for hours until it wore off was horrible. The second time was a basic dose of Vicodin. Same thing, but it was worse and I needed oxygen. So by that point, both medications were on my never again list. I got the swine flu in 2009. They gave me some kind of medication and Vicodin. But I wasn't aware of what medications I got because we went through my allergy list and I had the band on. My ex took me home, not an ex at the time, and gave me half the dose of Vicodin and later said he did that because he thought I said I was allergic to codeine, but figured they knew what they were doing at the hospital. But the doubt was there enough to give me only half a dose. I fell asleep on the couch. That was the last thing I remember. And nothing. No dreams or anything. And yet I was pretty much dead. If my ex and his family didn't notice my skin changing colors and low breathing, plus his doubt in the hospital, they got me in time. But I was technically dead. The next thing I remember is waking up on the couch, but feeling like something was missing. And I was told what happened. Yet, when I try to think about what it felt like to be dead or close, it's just nothing but a blank that feels like should be something there, time and considering all that happened. It's just nothing. Oh, and the reason I got prescribed a medication that was on my allergy list? Because the doctor was going on vacation and I was her last patient for the night. I drowned once. It was just like losing time. I.e. sleeping without a dream. Wasn't me, but my brother was legally dead for years after he was mistaken for a girl with the same name. Took a while for us to find out that he was dead. Went under for surgery. In what felt like 2 seconds later I woke up entirely oblivious that anything happened. I had legally died, and a man on his first week of being a nurse spent several minutes trying to get my heart beating again before running to the bathroom and puking for half an hour. He did save my life. Guess it was just a lot to process. My chest hurt but I was fine. Called it a bad reaction to anesthetic. Can you illegally die? What are they gonna do, arrest a body? Legally, I was dead for over an hour. I drowned underneath a cruise ship. I was drunk and I jumped off the balcony. I was stuck underneath the ship for 1 hour. I only died illegally doing LSD, lol. I had a really screwed up vision about bears. I used to be able to tell you all kinds of details, but after 5 years I don't remember. Thank you to the hospital for killing me while giving birth. I will never forget. I legally died a couple of years ago. No so great 3/10, would not recommend. I didn't legally die at all, and well after the fact I was nowhere near death. But 2 years ago I fell off a rock cliff about 30 feet and shattered my left ankle upon impact. I don't remember hitting the ground and blacked out for a couple seconds. I regained consciousness to my friend saying he was going to get me help, no cell service where we were. While he ran down the trail, 0.5 mile or so, I remember feeling warm, calm, and content. Everything around me was bright and I felt extremely calm and started to have mild hallucinations. For a split second I thought that was it, that was what death felt like. After 5 minutes or so I snapped out of it and proceeded to get help. %26 make it to the hospital with just a shattered left ankle. Multiple organ failure after a bone marrow transplant. It was like falling asleep, but without dreaming. Total blackness. No light at the end of the tunnel, no out-of-body experience, no life flashing in front of my eyes. Just blackness. When I was around 6 years old I was drowned at a lake and I can vividly remember the pain and burn in my lungs until at some point there was nothing, just black darkness, no pain, no sound, just me. I don't remember anything after that except waking up in a hospital bed with an oxygen mask on and all my family members in the room. Most could be purgatory since they didn't say dead. I remember feeling like it was time to go. Then I was like, no, I refuse. I screamed my nieces' and nephews' names, my mom's name, my husband's name. I felt like they really needed me. I don't think I screamed Earl, but I'd how else to describe it, and this vacuum-like feeling of going back into my body. I overdosed on fentanyl sold to me as OxyContin, and lights went out like when you turn off an old TV. I literally left my body and floated into space, watching everything below me as I've known it my entire life. The further I got from Earth, the darker and colder it was. Felt all the emotions possible. Scared, cold, sad, happy, confused, act. And with a blink of an eye I came floating right back to my body so fast everything felt like a flash, but I was out for about 30 minutes and boom, woke on the floor drenched in sweat, unable to breathe. Scariest thing ever. Not me but my grandfather. Man had been through 3 wars and had a moment in his old age when he nearly passed away before my grandmother woke him up. In his dream he said 3 tall, beautiful, red-headed angels were coming to get him, but right before they got him Grands woke him. He also said the beautiful angels were pissed that Grands woke him. Not my experience, but I remember reading about a man who died and was brought back, but during the time he died he claims he went through some of the circles of hell. The one that really terrified me was he said in one he was in a bottomless ocean, nothing around him, no fish, plants, nothing. But he felt that something massive was watching him far in the distance, but was very quickly coming towards him. My sister was pronounced dead after being hit by a car when she was a teenager. She said she went to a peaceful place that had a creek, where she encountered a childhood friend of hers who has passed away. He told her it wasn't her time, and she came back to life. Doctors saved her by drilling a hole in her skull to relieve pressure, among other things, I'm sure. I thought I died on salvia once. I was floating above my house in the clouds looking down on it. True out-of-body experience. This isn't as crazy as some stories on here, but I was 11 and while sleeping I turned face down into my pillow, tried to wake up to roll over and became paralyzed from sleep paralysis. I felt my body become dead weight and could only move my eyes. I panic as I can feel my airways struggle, slowly suffocating, body twitching slightly. Eyes still open, everything goes black. I felt like I was pulled out of my body and I could see myself laying in bed completely still. I'm not sure if it was brain firing one last time. I died for about 3 to 4 minutes. But I saw every color you could imagine while in a black void. Colors I hadn't seen that young. It was beautiful. The colors speed up and turn a pure white light all around me like everything was light. I had no limbs or body, but I moved by walking the same. I felt at peace, warm, happy. Felt I wanted to stay there. I saw an opening behind me to go back to my body. Instead I explored this large vast hall, but was stopped by a figure that I knew but can't remember the face or what we talked about, as if my memory was erased. No godlike figure, just felt like people that were there before me, that knew me. I remember being told I'm still needed and had to go back. I woke up to feeling someone giving me the hardest smack in my back and a searing pain in my lungs, taking in air but feeling like the 2 pieces of duct tape being pulled apart. Luckily my sister came in to ask me a question and noticed I wasn't moving and tried what she could think of and hit me out of panic. My chest hurt for 2 days, not from the hit but my lungs. Crazy part is I had no memory of any of it happening right after I came to. DL, I suffocated as a kid, died for 3 to 4 minutes. Met a figure who told me things I can't remember. Sister saves my life by having lucky timing. I hemorrhaged after having a D% 26C and they were pumping blood into me, but I was bleeding it out faster than they could give it to me. I remember the nurse saying she's dying, and at some point my dead aunt, who was my best friend, saying to me, "Knock it off, Angel, it's not your time yet." I remember taking a big breath in and hurting like hell. I guess I died for 30 seconds. My brother drowned me in the bath when we were kids. I remember drowning, panicking, the burning in my lungs, but nothing after that until I came to on the couch coughing up water with my dad looming over me where he'd been performing CPR. Literally from panic, to nothing, to waking up. The actual death bit was a big fat nothing, just skipped time. Like nothingness, then coming back very confused. I became aware I was talking and answering questions to an ambulance attendant. My wife says I wasn't making any sense. Just wanted to add, it was a seizure, stopped breathing, heart stopped. I've had some religious types tell me it wasn't my time, so that's why it was nothingness apostrophe. I think that's a BS excuse that allows them to continue believing apostrophe. My wife said I was grey. She knew I was dead. The nurse who happened to be in the store when I dropped was counting out the dead time to 911 as she performed CPR, breaking 2 ribs. Holy shit, that hurts, I learned later. Dead is dead, imho. I was dead, there was no pain, no hell, no heaven, you are just gone. I'm disappointed the top post isn't I don't remember, I was dead. This thread is half full of people describing actual medical emergencies, then being told by others that it doesn't count. The other half is people writing fiction, and the replies are eating it up. I can't tell you. I was born with no heartbeat, 8 knots and 2 full wraps of my umbilical cord around my neck. They revived me after 3 minutes and I've been here for 35 years. Hard to die 5. Overdosed when I was 17, remember getting hooked up to defibrillator, remember the paramedics taking me, remember getting into ambulance and I went into cardiac arrest on way to hospital and my heart stopped for like maybe a few seconds until defibrillator kicked it back on. I remember waking up and being told that or just realizing what had happened and thinking I was in heaven for 5 minutes before really coming around to realize what happened. It's just black, man, no tunnel, no light. Just nothing. But then again I was dead for literally seconds. My grandfather's heart began failing at the age of 92. It would fade to a faint beat and then come back full force. This would make him feel super weak then super strong all within a minute or so. He finally hit the floor right as the paramedics showed up. He later got a pacemaker and survived it. I asked him what it felt like when his heart was stopped and he said it just felt like going to sleep. He said, you know how everything just kind of fades out? It felt just like that. Then I'd wake up to them beating on my chest and it scared me. Then it'd just drift off again. I guess I don't technically have anything to share, but as a religious person, I don't think you would see the afterlife if you weren't staying there. Even from a perspective outside religion and my personal beliefs, in theory, the God who would put you in the afterlife would know if you were going to die or not, and if he just gave people the answers before it was really their time, that would kinda ruin the whole point of faith, believing in things you can't see. So just because your heart stopped, and you were legally dead, doesn't mean you were done yet. Clearly nothing. Like going from one room to another. Drowned when I was 10 yo. The pool went from shallow to deep really quick, which I didn't realize. Panic set in and then I woke up in the changing rooms. Had I died, I would have not cared or noticed, if that makes sense. I didn't remember anything, nor did I realize it had happened until I met a paramedic that had worked on me in the ambulance that told me about it afterward. I didn't feel anything or go anywhere, just nothing. Yes, I saw everything and nothing. I was somewhere and nowhere. It was strange. Never died, but I do believe I almost did once. My ex was abusive and he'd do this thing where he'd put me in a chokehold until I passed out. He did this a lot. He was doing that one day. I'd pass out, come back to and get up, he'd immediately do it again. This went on 3 times and the last time he held it too long. I felt this feeling of slipping, like I had to hang on for my life. There was no panic. It was peaceful, but I didn't want to die. I heard a bunch of people whispering and then all of a sudden I took a very deep breath and my ex was there with his hands on my chest like he was about to perform CPR. He wouldn't take me to the hospital, but I didn't feel too great for a while after that. I wouldn't say I legally died or anything, but I'm pretty sure I was pretty damn close to death after giving birth to my daughter. I thought I was done for and honestly it wasn't a pleasant feeling. I woke up angry AF. My experience is unique, I believe, due to about 5-ish incidents in one day. Mid-last year apparently a genetic defect finally caught up with me and my heart stopped once at home. I fell and my doctors believe that's what jolted me back. This one was just getting lightheaded, bit of a lose of vision, tunnel to black, and woke up on the floor. Sister was around so she got help quick and nothing asides from that on that one. Got to the hospital and they begin the general assessment and are about to discharge me, due to me basically appearing and testing normal. And in my eyes it played out like this: she asked some questions and I'm just responding to them, randomly and instantly like cartoon appearing. 10 people are around me, oxygen in my nose, and apparently that was my heart stopping for the third time. This was while sitting upright in a chair. This felt like blinking. This was, for that day, the most unsettling of my near-deaths. But, until the next one, nothing was confirmed. Now, after I faded on a chair, I was finally admitted into the ER, so I got to listen to my heart beat slower and slower. Lowest number I saw was 28 beats per minute. Then I was out. Chest compressions and all to bring me back from that one. 2 more incidents happened while there. I am now 33, got a pacemaker last year to prevent those unnecessary heart restarts. 1/10 would not recommend my day. But for those who enjoy this part. TL, doctor, over a 24-hour period my heart stopped about 5 times, 3 times while in a hospital being monitored. Only thing I felt was like a blinking action. Awake, dark for a tick, back. Nothing beyond that, and longest period of no heartbeat was I believe 2-ish minutes or less. I didn't legally die, but as a result of the motor vehicle accident, I had an extremely serious head injury. I have no memory of even leaving my house. Also, I was not drunk/on drugs or anything, it was just a freak accident. Apparently when the ambulance arrived, they had to cut off my clothes. I learned this when I was ready to be discharged and went to put on the clothes I was in during the accident, and strap me to a board with a neck brace. My eyes were fixed and dilated, which is often a clear medical sign of brain death. Miraculously, after getting to the hospital and having multiple CT scans, I came to just as they were taking the neck brace off of me. There was no bleeding in my brain or increased intracranial pressure, both of which are most associated with fixed and dilated pupils. Given the severity of the trauma, I was extremely lucky that the scans did not show serious abnormalities. I didn't know where I was and was terrified and confused. I remember just looking down after I came to and seeing blood from my face dripping onto my hospital gown. They asked if I remembered anything, and I said no, and then they told me I was in a serious accident. The prognosis for people with fixed and dilated pupils is not good. Mortality in various academic articles is around 50 to 75%. I was unconscious for at least 3 hours. I did not have any near-death experience, it was just nothingness, retrospectively, since I could not even perceive the nothingness while unconscious. I was very grateful to be alive, even if I was in such pain that morphine didn't even help. For me, the nothingness was like death. It scared the crap out of me and I've been much more cautious. I have reckless tendencies, in general after that experience. I was depressed forever and did a large combination of drugs and alcohol in my YOLO years cause I didn't care about dying and thought I was dozing off. In my dream I was fully aware but everything was pitch black, felt nothing, heard nothing, just me and my thoughts and a whole bunch of nothingness which seemed to last forever. When I woke up all people were standing over me. I apparently hadn't moved and wasn't breathing for at least 3 minutes. Ever since then I'm horrified of dying because I'm convinced there is life after death. One time I was on painkillers, drinking, little sleep and did a line of cocaine. As I sat up I am convinced my heart stopped because I could feel all of the blood in my body stop moving and start to sync with gravity. For a moment I lost consciousness and slumped over before waking back up pale and a little green. Let's just say I changed my life soon after. Just darkness, I don't remember anything. U/Shang got saved by U/Katara spurt water. Like having an old tube television turned off as you watch it. Coming back was the most jarring. Like loading some other player's save game. I used to run with a bad crowd. Was involved in a gang fight. I was stabbed multiple times. Lungs pierced, heart hit. As I was laying on the floor bleeding out I started getting really sleepy. Remember thinking, if I fall asleep, I'll just wake up and be in the hospital. I started going asleep. I was in between like these dream state and awake state. You know when you kinda hear real life but your dream is still lucid. Remember my brother telling me to wake up and I did. I woke up in an ambulance. They said I technically died. I'd kid was chill lol would not do again. Fade to pure nothingness. Literally blackness / non-existence. It's like being asleep without any dreams. My mom flatlined for about a minute a couple months ago. She has an irregular heartbeat and sometimes it goes up to 200 BPM. So the doctor gave her something that drops her heart rate down, but they gave her way more than they usually give, to the point where her heart stopped beating. From what she remembers, it was white and she could feel people trying to take her up. She thinks it was like angels trying to take her to heaven. But then she ended up coming back to life by a defibrillator and all theses nurses around her thinking she was dead. I was electrocuted when I was 20, I remember seeing everything like a photo negative, white, black, grey, before I passed out. When I came to, looked like I had kissed a fireplace. Was at my mom bedside as she passed away. For about 30 minutes before she actually stopped breathing, we could tell she was having a conversation with my grandmother and cousin who had passed earlier. I was out at the time for surgery. They did something wrong with my anesthesia and I stopped breathing. They corrected it, finished and moved me to recovery, where I apparently decided to stop again. No cool visions, but it took months for me to feel not disassociated from my own body sometimes. I was born dead, premature with gastrocysis. Guts developed outside the abdomen, and my umbilical cord wrapped around my neck. Guess I'm supposed to be here for something. __/. They had to stop my heart and they started it again. I was dead for like 1 or 2 minutes, but I never realized I lost consciousness. I was sure I remained conscious. Is this an ad for the Netflix show? Not dead, and bad with writing. On phone and English is my second language. Sorry, had a car crash at 90 kp/h, around 50 mph I think. Face to face with a car going like 90 mph, or so, felt like a dream, had a bad concussion and lost of grasp over reality / brain shut down. Took me like 12 hours to get close to feeling normal, but basically my airbags had to F up and didn't open, so I just crashed headfirst in the glove box / woke up 1 hours and a half later not knowing my name or what the heck happened. Been 9 months and I still feel some backlash and minor pain around the part that broke, sternum. Like that not exactly bone part between you ribs. The center of it, and shoulders. Don't know how to post pics. I would have liked to at least show the car. Sorry. Can you illegally die? My dad was declared legally dead in 2015, he had an accident, was sent home after time in the hospital, a blood clot had formed in his leg and dislodged. It led to some scary moments, and he was legally dead on the operating table. He doesn't talk about it much, it's kind of a dark time. But he has told me once before he felt this sense of nothingness and darkness before a bright burst of light and then a searing pain through his back and chest. They had revived him on the operating table. He's a devout man of faith, but it shook him pretty hard because he said the separation of consciousness and the feelings he had weren't what he expected. This is the first time I will have ever responded or posted anything ever on here, but I felt compelled to share my experience for some reason. I suppose because it's one of the few things I seem to have quite a bit of experience with. I've attempted suicide multiple times in my life since the age of 13. Nearly every single time, I landed in ICU on life support. There was one time I overdosed at the age of 15 and apparently died in the ambulance after my lungs shut down. I was in a coma for a week. Towards the end of that week, I could remember hearing the voices of my family and medical staff, but could never see them and could never respond. But I also wasn't afraid or upset that I couldn't. I remember finally waking up to my grandfather's voice, and that was the comfort that brought me out of the other world I was stuck in and back to this one. Another time I overdosed, and that time I did have a legitimate out-of-body experience because after I was dropped off at the hospital, I remember being able to see the friends that dropped me off on the other side of the doors as I was being wheeled off onto the bed and was apparently coding. I remember watching someone jump on top of me in the bed with me and start performing chest compressions on me as we were both being wheeled down a hallway. I remember seeing my clothes being cut off of me. I was watching all of this as if I were looking down from ceiling. I don't remember much else other than that. My last suicide attempt, which I wasn't hospitalized for, but I feel was the most severe, I tried to overdose consuming 2 bottles of benzodiazepines and a bottle of blood pressure pills. It should've killed me, but it didn't. When I woke up the next day, I apparently tried to hang myself. I have zero recollection of doing this, but the state in which I woke up indicates otherwise. I guess I'd tried to hand myself and the noose had come unraveled. I woke up in a haze on the floor. I had a huge gash in my neck from rope burn, my tongue was swollen and blue, there were multiple burst blood vessels in my eyes, and I had lost all control of my bowels and bladder. I could not stand, all I could do was crawl to the bathroom and then to the bed. I remember being certain I must have actually died. I don't know how to explain it, it was just a feeling of knowing, and my experience with death was nothing but blackness and darkness and emptiness, but not in a scary way. This is what partially contributed to a lifelong atheism being extended many more years. There was also an unintentional, but not unwelcome heroin overdose in which I had to be narcaned back to life. That also was a dark, empty black void of nothingness that I wouldn't necessarily object to, but it wasn't anything I would choose either. There were many other serious attempts, but I don't recall anything that changed my perspectives or thoughts about the afterlife or anything any more interesting that stood out in my mind than what I've just discussed. I'm not sure what determines the kind of experiences one will have in a near-death experience, but I do believe a large part of it is dependent on the things that are important to you enough so to keep you grounded to this life in this world, and that a large part of it must simply just be random. At any rate, this is one of the most interesting topics I feel any human can discuss, and I'm glad to have stumbled across this one. Well, it was a double experience. I had clocked out because of stroke-like symptoms. I was completely out of it and I had a raging headache. It took me months to remember the entirety of the event. It wasn't caused by an accident, it came completely out of the blue but lasted for a few hours. The last very fuzzy thing I was able to remember was being told to lie down onto the MRI table. Then everything went dark. It's like when you have a dreamless sleep and wake up confused. Apparently I asked, "What am I doing here?" when I regained consciousness. I was dead for 5 minutes and 27 seconds. Everybody's experiences are different. For me, there was no life flashing before my eyes moment or any visions. I didn't see the pearly white gates or the face of moist critical. It was just nothing for a second or two until I woke back up. Sometimes thoughts come back around to haunt me, like, is that really what death is like? Why did I come back? Or why me? It's hard not to question the what-ifs and fall into a rabbit hole of existential dread. The important thing to keep in your warm, fresh mind is that you are living and breathing. You are still here and you are still a part of life as it is with you. But it was dark and cold. Really, really cold. Drowned and shot in my case. The drowning felt peaceful, I guess. I can only assume that the brain's response is to release calming signals to the body after the panic of the struggle to stay afloat or something. It just felt comfortable, and when I came to it wasn't a bright light or anything, just like waking up abruptly from a nap. Groggy and shitty. Being shot sucked. Panic, pain, confusion, then again nothing. Just nothing until I was brought back. Once awake in the hospital it was more confusion and people running around, which was fucking scary. Happened to my gran when she had her first baby, my aunt. She said it just felt like blacking out a little, and that after she came around, she could remember what the doctors had been saying while she was out. But in reality, she was legally dead for 2 to 3 minutes.